What's up, faithful? You're listening to another episode of the 49ers Web Zone No Huddle podcast, a part of the Odyssey Network. I'm Brian Rennick. He's Al Sacco in a soon-to-be stormy New York. It is Thursday afternoon. It's the middle of the summer, but the 49ers have organized team activities. People are required to be there. Brandon Ayuk's not there. He's getting fined. Trent Williams showed up yesterday. There is some news and notes to go over. Al, it is almost that time of the season where it's just dead, but I'm excited to talk a little bit of actual news and notes with you.
Obviously the big thing, Christian McCaffrey, right? And this is the contract we talked about, what they thought we were going to do, where they would give him more money and guaranteed money in 2024 and 2025, and then some dummy years at the end of the contract. So essentially what it is, he was due 24 million over the next 2 years, basically 12 and 12. Right. What they did was they kicked it up to 32 million. Now it's pretty much 16 and 16, and that money, or a large portion of it, is guaranteed. The 2026 part of the deal is basically a team option. And then 2027, if they even get there, I mean, if he's still playing at that age, great. But they would probably restructure it or whatever. That looks like it's a real dummy year. So it's a win-win, man. McCaffrey's happy. He's got his guaranteed money. And if you're the Niners, now he's not a free agent after next season, but you have some flexibility. If he still is really playing well, you can keep him on that team option. And again, extending is probably crazy at his age, but see where you are and you have some more flexibility. So I thought it was a win-win. I thought it was a good deal. There was definitely some fire around that smoke with him not being at the voluntary workouts. Yeah. So it is what it is, but they did the right move here, and it's exciting. Listen, he was arguably the best non-QB offensive player last year. He won Offensive Player of the Year, so certainly has that argument.
Hard to argue that he wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, unless you want to throw. But, in a regular season, well, there's a Justin Jefferson or a Tyreek Hill. But even regardless, he's top 3 every year. You got to figure he's right up there with the best non-QBs in the league. So it's a great extension, man. I'm happy that they got it done, and it's kind of like, all right, let's go.
Well, and not only that, but by doing this, they lowered his cap hit, including for the years of the extension, by almost $8 million each season. Which again, I was going to say it's like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, but that's not really what it is, right? That's kind of like talking about doing things that don't really matter because things are going down anyway. But the 49ers are playing, a long game here when it comes to these contracts, because they've got Brock Purdy, they've got Brandon Ayuk, they've got Diamador Lenore, they've got Charvarius Ward, they've got some guys that they're going to have to pay. And so they are doing some creative, I think some creative accounting, if you will, to be able to do that. But the interesting thing is, now that it is June 6th, on June 1st, they got that cap relief from the Eric Armstead release in the form of about $18 million. So the 49ers currently in the NFL, I believe, have the fifth most cap space for the 2024 season, which is wild considering the players that they have on this team and the contracts that they've signed and things of that nature. But, they are doing what they need to do in order to not only compete this year, but still remain competitive as some of these older players age out and you replace them with younger guys. And so, this Christian McCaffrey trade, hard to argue that it's not one of the better trades in 49ers history, if not NFL history, just based on impact. He's definitely deserves to be the highest paid running back in the NFL. He is the highest paid running back in the NFL. And basically all they did was they took what was non-guaranteed money for him and they guaranteed it. And that just helps them out as well, because they also tacked on 3 void years at the end. So they get to spread all that guaranteed bonus money out over the course of the next, I believe it's 6 seasons, which again, in those void years, he's going to count against the cap, but not nearly as much. And again, it keeps their window open for this season. I know that as fans, you want to look at what they're doing and say, all right, we've got a ton of cap space. Where can we spend that? And they may still look at, one of the news and notes is they did sign Logan Thomas as a tight end too, which I think is a big, I think it's a big deal. I've been screaming from the rooftops for 4 seasons now that they need a better, more reliable tight end too, as a pass catcher, not necessarily, a Charlie Warner who's in there to block. And Logan Thomas is that, but he's not quite, he spent most of his time in the slot or off the line of scrimmage in Washington. And I would imagine that, that's probably going to be kind of his role as well here, but just to have a reliable tight end too, I think is big. So again, I think they're not necessarily done. Justin Simmons is still out there. Could they look to sign him? But largely, if you listen to John Lynch, again, all of this space is to roll over next year so that they can sign guys like Brock Purdy and things like that.
Yeah, and the question now is what's next, right? So what is next? And the Logan Thomas, it's a smaller signing, but I agree with you. It's a good one. I really like it. I think it locks him in as tight end too. Yeah. You got Saubert as the third blocking tight end, and it looks like Cameron Latu might certainly got an uphill battle. So they could do another vet like a Justin Simmons, but really, like you said, they have guys that, okay, who are we re-signing? Brandon Ayuk is the big one. And we spent a ton of time on him. But let's talk a little bit about not just Ayuk, but just the receiver room kind of in general right now. Because, that Ayuk contract is looming. Yeah. I think they'll get something done. But if he's in this idea where I'm worth $30 million a year, I don't think the Niners are going to do that. I just don't. So does that mean he plays on his fifth-year option? Well, Mike Silver sent out a tweet that I thought really broke it all down pretty well. He said, basically what's going on with the Niners, where things stand with their receivers. They drafted Pearsall in the first round. He's a part of not only their future, but right now. Correct. So if he comes in and can make an impact, he's going to be playing a lot. If Ayuk ends up taking their best offer, whatever that is, and I personally don't think it's going to be at $30 million a year, Debo will be gone after 2024. And we all pretty much, that's what everybody's been saying. The writing's on the wall with that. But if Ayuk doesn't take their best offer, you would presume he'd play on the fifth-year option unless he completely wants to hold out or some shit. But that's what you would figure. And then Mike says it's Hunger Games between him and Debo to see who stays beyond 2024. So it's almost like they're each on a one-year deal competing to see who the Niners are going to invest in moving forward. He said there's still a chance Ayuk or Debo could be traded between now and the November deadline if the offer is good enough or if things have devolved with Ayuk, which is, again, also a big possibility. So you could have Debo just admitted, there was some back and forth with his agent and himself and the Niners about trade stuff. So that's been there. And with Ayuk, if it does devalue, if it gets to the point where he's like, I'm not taking any less than 30, the Niners say, we have 4 different guys we give 100 targets a year to. We are not going to pay you $30 million a year to throw the ball to 110 times. We love you. You're a good player, but our offense just isn't built that way. 25 is our best offer, or whatever it ends up being. Market wise, it should be the Jalen Waddle deal, I think, because they're similar. So it should be 28 a year. But if that does not happen, you could see things devolve to the point where, okay, maybe a trade is imminent. But I think we're still a ways away from that. But the receiver room, something to watch over the next 2 months or 3 months or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, I don't think 30 million is enough to get the 49ers to be like, we won't go there. For whatever reason, the 49ers are content to wait until the end of the summer to get these extensions signed. And so it's hard to know whether, again, it's a sticking point or whether it's just like, hey, we're going to get this done. We just, we do it on our timeline. We don't do it on your timeline. I don't understand it. I've said it before. It doesn't make any sense to me. It is what it is. But if you look at the cap, because here's the thing, like as much as $30 million a year for a wide receiver sounds like a lot on an offense like this that has multiple mouths to feed, those mouths are getting older and they are not going to be there as Brandon Ayuk plays into the latter part of whatever extension they give him. And so you've got to factor that in as well. But not only that, $30 million a year based on where the cap is now is essentially what they signed Debo for 2 years ago when Debo was up for his extension in terms of percentage of the cap. So I don't think that 30 million is a wild number for Brandon Ayuk. And I don't think that the 49ers would necessarily balk at that. Again, just knowing that this is essentially what we paid Debo. Now,
but was my argument to that was Debo coming off the season where he was kind of the offense, right? Debo kind of carried them that year. So I think that could be the argument for Debo, where like, look what I just did for you guys this season. Whereas Ayuk, he was great. But again,
but I also think you could argue, that Brandon Ayuk carried the passing offense last season. Deebo Samuel came off a season where he carried the entire offense largely because there were injuries and things like that. And he just supermaned that team on his back. But Brandon Ayuk, you could argue, carried the passing offense last season in terms of just his production and things like that. And, we've talked about the likelihood that this team is going to pass more moving forward. And I think if you have that in your mind, you're not getting rid of a guy like Brandon Ayuk. That's why you get rid of, a guy like Deebo Samuel, who is, a guy that, as I've said before, is kind of a holdover from an offense in which you didn't trust your quarterback.
Right.
And so that's kind of where I'm at in terms of who they're going to prioritize. And, Albert Breer put out a nugget in one of his many articles that he did that, a team could still pry Deebo Samuel from the 49ers right now. And, the argument that he has is that if the 49ers had their druthers, they would choose Brandon Ayuk over Deebo Samuel. And I honestly believe that. And so that could mean this season, that could mean next season. I don't know what that means. If the Jets come and be like, hey, we'll give you a first round pick for Deebo Samuel before the season starts, do the 49ers accept that? Could Deebo Samuel get traded at the trade deadline? I'm not sure that would happen. I think if Deebo Samuel leaves, it's either prior to this season or after this season. I don't think they would mess with chemistry when it comes to like a mid-season trade. But yeah, I think that, I just don't think that $30 million a year is wild, is too much. When a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown or a guy like Jalen Waddle, right? Guys that aren't necessarily as Amon-Ra St. Brown is pretty important to that Lions offense.
He's a bigger
Jalen Waddle is the second option, and Brandon Ayuk isn't necessarily the second option. And so to me, I think they get something done. I think they do it. But I just don't think they do it until what we expect, which is the end of July or beginning of August.
So how do they view Ayuk? With Deebo Samuel, they paid him for what he did. If they pay Ayuk for what he did, yeah, he's in the Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle kind of range. Or are they going to pay him for what they expect him to do? So say, okay, like you said, we're going to move more of a passing offense. You had 105 targets last year. Well, probably going to get 135 this year. And next year you make it 150. So if they're looking at it that way, yeah, then I could see, well, you're paying him $30 million. We're paying you to be our alpha dog. Right now, I don't think he's the alpha dog. You could say he's their best wide receiver, but Christian McCaffrey is their alpha dog. Right. Sure. And then you kind of have this three-headed monster in the passing game. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how they view it and how this all plays out. I think with Bosa last year, like it was happening. We're like, Bosa go. I know it went forever, but that's not a thing where they were going to be like, we're going to trade Nick Bosa. But with this, I don't think because they just drafted, in theory, two guys that one of whom could replace him, and Debo's still kind of there, and Juwan Jennings is still there. So it's not like with Nick Bosa where he's the dude, and everybody else even close. I asked some other people. So yeah, it'd be really interesting where it's going to go. But what is also something that I'm watching is what other guys are they going to prioritize, Brian? Because you have Charvarius Ward, you have Denominator Lenore, you have Hufanga, you have Drake Greenlaw, who I feel like this, because he's hurt, it's really flying under the radar. Aaron Banks, these are guys who are on the last year of their deal. As well, you have to look at not only that, but you have the guys that you have starting right now, like a Leonard Floyd. So really on a 1-year deal. I know it's a 2-year deal, but Malik Collins, guys like that are going to be a big part of the team this year. They're really a short-term fix. So what's next? What guys are you going to prioritize? You would assume that they're going to draft to replace that D-line stuff. That's usually how they do it. But are you going to sign both corners? Can you only sign one? I know with Hufanga and Greenlaw, you kind of have to play a wait and see approach, right? Are they healthy? Do they look the same? Which could end up biting you in the ass a little bit with Greenlaw. But I feel like one of these corners, that's kind of my prediction right now. One of these corners will have a new contract by the time the season starts.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the new and I would put my money on Diamador Lenore just because I think they can sign him to a contract that is largely more reasonable than Charvarius Ward, because Charvarius Ward is coming off an all-pro season. So, he's going to command a bigger contract than Lenore is. And so I think you could see, a Lenore extension. I don't know that it would be a long-term extension. I think, maybe they extend him for 2 years, right? Just to, again, get him signed so that at the very least, if contract negotiations break down with Ward and you're not willing to go as high as Ward wants you to go, you still have Diamador Lenore there as your fallback. And so between those two, I agree. I think Lenore gets extended maybe prior to the season, during the season, during week 1, right? We've seen that before. I think Dre Greenlaw's extension, that 2-year extension, happened like right at the end of preseason going into the regular season. I think you could see something like that. And like I said, it could be a 2-3-year extension where, he's making good money, but not cornerback 1 money. And then you just hope that you can get a deal done with Ward that works for both sides. Ward already came out this week and said, he wants to stay in San Francisco. He likes it here. He likes the team. He likes his coaches, but in his words, he's looking for a bag. And so, whether the 49ers, and he deserves one. So, but you're also talking about a guy that at the end of whatever contract you give him is going to be in his early 30s, which tends to be kind of the death knell for cornerbacks. And so you got to be a little bit wary of that. So it'll be interesting, but I agree with you. It's interesting. We talk a lot about how much the 49ers have wrapped up into players, but when you look on the defensive side, it's really just Nick Bosa and Fred Warner. Everybody else is really short term. And so it'll be interesting to see, do they decide that one of the guys in on the back end, right? So then you've got Bosa, Warner, and one of your guys on the back end. Again, who does that look like? But yeah, I agree with you. One of Ward or Lenore are going to get extended, and I think it'll be prior to the season. I would just put my money on Lenore.
Yeah, and you do risk with Ward too, and you're risking it with McCaffrey is you're paying these guys who are a little bit older, and again, they deserve to get paid. They're phenomenal. You're certainly not going to walk away from them right now, but you're risking hitting a wall. You're risking getting old. I saw Josh Dubow. Is that how you say his name?
From the AP.
From AP, yeah. He put out a tweet. Christian McCaffrey is the 9th player in the last 20 years with 1,900 plus touches in the regular season and playoffs before turning 28. Here's how many 1,000-yard seasons from scrimmage the others have had after 28. Adrian Peterson had 3. Steven Jackson had 2. Marshawn Lynch had 2. LaShawn McCoy had 1. The other guys are Ezekiel Elliott, who's still active. He hasn't had any. Ray Rice didn't play. There's a lot of stuff going on with him. Joe Mixon will turn 28 this summer, and Le'Veon Bell didn't have any. So it's a risk. These guys hit a wall. But again, if you get another Christian McCaffrey not at 1,000 yards from scrimmage, he would have to get hurt. Knock on wood. That doesn't happen. Just from the sheer volume he's going to have.
I was saying, Kyle said in his press conference earlier this week that they are looking to try and limit some of his touches, and what Kyle said is save Christian from himself, because largely
investment now.
And I think I do think that you're going to see you are going to see less of a Christian McCaffrey centric offense, I think, largely because there's more faith in Brock Purdy, but also because you want Christian McCaffrey healthy for a full season and the postseason. And so, there is, and that's another reason why, again, yes, Christian McCaffrey is the alpha dog. Do you want to continue that? Or do you want to start putting it on the back of your young quarterback and wide receiver duo, which I think is something that they have in mind, which again is why you extend Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah. And I'm of the belief too, where I think if they extend Ayuk, they have some serious choices to make. They have decisions to make. If they don't extend Ayuk, they have more money to spread around. And I think they can keep all these guys. But if not, if you have 3 guys who are going to be, Bosa, 4 guys really, Bosa, Warner, Purdy, and Ayuk are making huge money, I don't care what cap gymnastics you do. At some point, you have to pay the piper. Like at some point, you're not going to be able to keep some of these guys. So right now, going into the season, the 49ers have 8 guys who count at least 10 million towards the cap, and they take up about $147 million. Those 8 guys. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a position where they could soon have 4 guys, Purdy, Ayuk, Warner, and Bosa, cost nearly as much as that on their own. So just 4 guys, and you don't have your left tackle in there. That's assuming Trent Williams is going to retire by then. So they have to figure that out too. When you look forward, 2026 as contracts stand right now, things can always get restructured, I guess, right? You can always move money around or whatever. But as of right now, Warner is due $26.7 million towards the cap, and Bosa $42 million towards the cap. So that's $69 million towards the cap with just Warner and Bosa. I don't care how you do Purdy's deal. It's going to be a huge, at least a chunk of a cap hit. Because if you're talking upwards of $50 million, even if you push it back, it's still going to be a chunk of a cap hit. And that would be what? 2026 would be year 2 of Ayuk's extension. So again, you could push Ayuk back, but then you're pushing Ayuk and Purdy back. And Bosa still has still a lot of money as you move on. Yeah. So there are big contracts happening now. The Niners have done a good job paying a lot of guys, but because they're not paying a quarterback, you could pay 3 guys $20 million because that's just a little bit more than a quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. You could have a stud left tackle and a stud tight end and a stud whatever, wide receiver, whatever it is for 15 to 20 million or whatever you do. They're not going to be able to do that soon. So that's where these decisions come in. And I trust, look, they deserve the benefit of the doubt to me. They've shown that they can keep a good roster together. But it's going to be crazy to see how they do this.
Yeah.
Who they prioritize. They're not going to, everybody's not coming back. It's just, we've already saw it with Armstead. We already know with Debo next year. There's going to be other casualties. We just have to help the guys like Green and Pearsall and the guys that they brought in. Jair Brown's going to be a huge person this year.
Yeah.
That they draft well and can step up because there's decisions coming up.
Well, and the other thing that you have to keep in mind as you forecast forward about, what contracts look like, the cap continues to go up because the NFL continues to make money hand over fist, and streamers are now coming in, and Netflix is buying in, and that money is getting dispersed, and Peacock is buying in, and that money is getting dispersed. And when you look at TV ratings of the 100 most watched television programs in 2023, 91 of them were NFL games. 91.
Isn't that crazy? I mean,
it's wild. It's wild. It's just
obsession.
It is exactly. And so the league is going to continue to make money, and that cap is going to continue to go up. And so, Justin Jefferson just signed for $35 million a year. In 3 years, that might look like an absolute steal because he's making 12% of the cap, where right now he's making almost 20% of the cap, right? So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that it feels hard right now. It feels like, oh my God, $30 million for Brandon Ayuk. But then, by the time that, his 3rd year hits on his extension and he's making 12% of the cap, you're like, oh, that's not a big deal at all. So there is that to keep in mind as well. The cap will continue to go up.
Yeah, the Purdy thing is the elephant in the room right now, just in terms of what it's going to be and how it's going to be structured. And obviously that's their number one priority. If he is 85% of what he was last season, he's absolutely going to lock down and get a franchise quarterback contract. Yeah. So it's just got to see how it comes out and plays with that. But Brian, we're talking about contracts, and we've been talking about Ayuk and all these other things. I feel like that's dominated a lot of the news. With OTAs starting, something that I think should really be in the front of everyone's mind is the defense. I have questions about the defense. And again, aren't necessarily negative questions. They're just questions. What will Brandon Staley's impact be on this defense? Because he's essentially, it looks like, the head coach of the defense, right? How will Nick Sorensen do in his first year as defensive coordinator? It's his first year. We don't know. There tend to be growing pains early on. What will the new D-line additions look like? I'm not sold on that they're going to be able to stop the run. I hope that they prove me wrong. There are a lot of new guys in that mix. Gross Matos and Floyd, who's a vet, Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott. What are these guys going to come in and look like? It's a very different group without Armstead, and even you move on from like a Chase Young or something like that. It's a different group, and again, huge because these are 2 impact players. when are Greenlaw and Funga going to be 100%? What are they going to look like? Are they going to look like Greenlaw and Funga? Because if not, then again, you're like, oh, this isn't as good of a defense. So this defense is coming into me. I feel like everybody thinks, well, it's the Niners defense. This defense is coming into me, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, and 2 really, really good corners.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I got a lot of questions. So I'm really interested to see how this group is gelling, how they do, not only in OTAs, but when camp starts. And if it's going to be a top defense this season, I think it's going to be a good defense. Is it going to be a top elite defense? That I don't know.
Yeah, here's the thing that I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day, and I think as modern, and by modern I mean from 2000 and on, right? Mm-hmm. As 49er fans, when the 49ers have been really good under Harbaugh and then under Shanahan, they were always really good because their defense was really good. Mm-hmm. Which was a departure for 49ers fans, right? Because the heyday in the 80s, it was offense. Although those defenses were also
underrated.
Pretty good, underrated, and probably you're right. You probably don't get enough credit. And then in '94, the last time they won it, which is hard to say, that's a long ass time ago. That's 30 years ago, man. Jeez. You had a defense led by Deion Sanders, arguably the best defensive back of all time, and Ken Norton Jr. And right, that defense was really good as well. And then in 2012, right, you've got just a defense that just kicked ass and an offense that just needed to kind of hold its own, and you would likely win games. And then you get Shanahan here, and in 2019, again, it is the defense that led that team. They were a defense first team.
Yeah, the defensive line dominated. Yeah,
exactly. And you could argue all the way until 20. I would argue until last season. Again, it was the defense that led this team.
Yeah.
But the thing about building teams where you are counting on your defense is defensive performance is far more volatile year over year than offensive performance. And I think that you're starting to reach a point where the 49ers said, all right, we've hit our ceiling with trying to focus on having a kick-ass defense that leads our team. We need to start focusing on having an offense that leads this team. And with Brock Purdy now, you say, all right, we've got our quarterback. We've got Christian McCaffrey. We still got Trent Williams. We've got, right, the talent on this team is on the offensive side of the ball now. Doesn't mean that there's not talent on the defense, but this is an offense first team now. And so to me, as much as we're used to having a top 5 defense, I think with this offense, you don't need to have a top 5 defense to succeed. I think you need to have a top 15 defense. And I don't think there's any realm where the talent on that side of the ball wouldn't be a top 15 defense. You've still got Nick.
Oh, yeah.
You've still got Fred Warner. You've still got Ward, Lenore. You're going to figure out, what's going on at safety. Greenlaw will be back. Like, you are going to have a top 15 defense. If this offense even just repeats what it did last year, I anticipate it being better, but even if it just repeats what it did last year, they're going to win a lot of games. And so as much as I don't know what to expect from the defense, I still think there's a floor that says this team is at the very least a top 15 defense. And if that is the case, then again, this team is going to win a lot of games and will be in the playoffs and will still be Super Bowl contenders. And so as much as I don't know what to expect, I'm not afraid of that side of the ball. I don't think there's any realm where that side just completely collapses, because there are, again, at every level, you've got really superstar players. And so to me, like I said, as long as and I would argue that it's probably not going to be terribly great the first half of the season as they continue to evolve under Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley, and they start to figure out kind of who they are as a defense and what their philosophy is. And I know it's, Nick Sorensen got hired as a defensive coordinator because he already understood kind of the core values that they have and who they want to be as a defense and things like that. I understand that, but they are bringing in some ideas from Brandon Staley that I think are going to take time to flesh out and to really become a part of who they are. And so I think as long as your defense is ascending as you go into the playoffs, like the Chiefs last year, right? Then you're exactly where you need to be. And so to me, I am less concerned about the defense than I am about whether or not this offense can take the next step. And I genuinely believe that it can. But to me, again, as long as the offense is as good as it was last year, I think this defense is definitely good enough to get them into the playoffs and give them a shot at a Super Bowl.
So I think as you build your team, if they believe Purdy's a franchise guy who can throw the football, and I think if they believe that, you start to build around that, right? And in previous years, Garoppolo had his faults, right? You knew what Jimmy was, so you kind of did have to have a good defense because it went for a long time where they weren't, they're scoring like 22, 23 points, 25 points, right? Whereas now they're scoring 30 points, 35 points. So I think you shift as you build into that. So the worry, again, just playing devil's advocate, one, our team's going to be able to run the ball on this defense, keep the offense off the field. Okay. Other thing is and again, I still think, like you said, it's going to be a top 15 defense. I don't foresee them giving up 30 points a game, but actually Niner Fanatic podcast just put in our chat, brings up a good point. One thing the offense needs to evolve is the drop back passing game because they've struggled in that aspect. So if you do get in more games where it becomes a bit of a shootout and you got to drop back and pass, can you do that? Well, if they seem like they're trying to bring in receivers who can beat man coverage and do things that way, the offensive line does have to get better with pass protection. And, maybe with some of the guys that they brought in, like Pooney, who's more of a pass protector, that's what they're looking to do. But that's where the offense has to evolve. They have to get better in the drop back game if they're going to. And again, it's not going to be an awful defense, but I just don't think it's going to be the Niners defense you're used to seeing. To be honest with you, they played great in the Super Bowl for most of the game, but they weren't the Niners defense previously to that. They kind of played like shit in the playoffs.
Right.
And towards the end.
Yeah, no, 100%. Against the Lions and the Packers, it was awful.
Yeah, I remember watching Good
Except
Morning
in the
Football.
second half.
It was I want to say it was Ryan Leaf talking to Peter Schrager, I think, and he said, well, the Niners defensive line, and Peter Schrager, who's really tied into San Francisco, was like, well, hold on, that's not the Niners defensive line anymore. Like, that's a different group. Even he said that. So I think it's gonna be a different defense. We'll see how some of these guys brought in, if they can step up and be better, maybe than I anticipate they're going to be around the stars, because that's what you need, right? You have the stars already there. You have 2 star corners, you have a star linebacker, you have a star defensive end. You just need the guys around them to kind of step in and be good role players and things like that. If you want to call Javon Hargrave a star still, again, I think he might be on the regression.
I mean, he's getting paid like a star.
He is.
Yeah. And so you got to hope that
years ago.
Yeah. You got to hope that, and he even said, like, I gotta be better this year. He wasn't happy with his, performance, but, I think the other thing is, and again, as Niner Fanatic podcast said, in my opinion, the defensive end group is sneaky deep. It is deep. We just don't know what to expect from it. Right. We know what to expect from Nick Bosa, and we know what to expect from Leonard Floyd. Right. Because just they have a reputation for production. What we don't know is what to expect from Gross Matos. Is he going to be the big end? Is he going to fill that Charles Omenihu role or that Arden Key role? Right. I imagine that's what they signed him for, and we just have to see. Is Robert Beal Jr. Going to step in and be a situational D Ford type pass rusher where you're just coming in on third down to pin your ears back and go. There are players there. We just don't know what to expect from them because we haven't seen them in 49ers uniforms in this defense before. Right. I think you can expect from Malik Collins what you got from Malik Collins as a Texan because they run the same defense. So he's established. That's kind of a plug and play, but really everything else along that line outside of Bosa and Floyd, there's really just a lack of reliable performance for you to kind of just rest your hopes on. And so this defensive line could be really, really good, or it could be really, really mediocre. We have no idea. But if it's a line led by Nick Bosa, you got to kind of think, and Javon Hargrave, you got to think that at the very least your floor is mediocre, right?
Yeah.
And where your ceiling is we don't know. And to me, I feel like the players that they brought in with an eye towards what that defensive line looked like in 2022, that last year under D'Amico, right? Where, it's just wave after wave after wave. It's not all superstars, but it's just dudes that come in and produce. And I think that's what they're trying to get back to. And it'll be interesting to see if they can.
Yeah. Gross Matos is really a huge name for me, because when you get in those pass rushing situations, like you said, Floyd's established, Hargrave's established, Bosa's established. I would think he's going to be the guy to kick inside if you go with your top four there.
Right.
And if he's good, if he is a Charles Omenihu type, then
that's
you're
huge.
talking about something there. Yeah. So,
yeah,
but it does,
you're
like you said,
it
just remains to be seen. We just don't know. So for me, it's question mark. I don't love the safety group, and I'm worried about not having Greenlaw there. Love the corners. Love the corners. I think Adam's going to end up doing a good job. We have Green, they have Rocky Sin, more deep there than they have been. So with those two top guys, I like what they have going on there. So there are some really, really strong pieces there. But just a lot of, we don't know, and we won't know until they put on the cleats and the pads and get out there.
Yadam has impressed so far at OTAs. Ward has sat out. He's recovering from core muscle surgery in the offseason. So Yadam has played in Ward's spot and has impressed, according to Eric Branch, who reported that he is currently viewed as the leading candidate to start opposite Charvarius Ward, with Diamador Lenore kicking in. And you also, we talked about an extension for Lenore. You almost wonder if the 49ers hope that they can kick Lenore inside and then extend him as a nickel corner and not an outside corner, so you pay him less. Like, legitimately, I think that's part of the calculus. Outside of the fact that I think Lenore will be good in the role because he's a willing tackler and he's good rushing the quarterback, and he has the requisite skills to be good as a slot corner. But you don't pay those guys as much as outside corners. They're getting paid more, and so it's not like a huge discount, but it's still a discount. And then you've got Renardo Green, who you're hoping is a guy that can step in, and you've got Rocky Sin, and you've got Darrell Luter Jr. Like, there's depth in the defensive back room that we've never seen under Kyle Shanahan before. I'm most excited about that group. I think it's arguably the best position group on the defensive side of the ball, which is, again, wild to say based on what we've seen in the past. But and again, it's all about wait and see, right? Because it's a new defensive coordinator. Brandon Staley's coming in. It's a lot of new players. It's almost a brand new defensive line outside of Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave. It's Fred Warner and a bunch of other dudes, right? Just dudes, because Greenlaw's not there. But again, I also think that this defense, you're going to see a lot of 3 safety looks, a lot of nickel looks, where you're only having two linebackers on the field anyway. And so that's going to be interesting to see as well. So again, it's you have to wait and see with the defense. With the offense, you know what to expect. Everybody's back. Everybody's back.
Yeah, plus, like you said, it should be the same or better.
Yeah. So it should be at least as good, if not better, with the pieces that you've added. Another year of development from Brock Purdy, a full offseason from Brock Purdy, so that, I think, is the biggest question for this 49ers team is, what will the defense look like at the beginning of the season? What will it look like in the middle of the season? And then by the time the playoffs roll around, has this defense gelled into a unit that you can trust? Or is this going to be a team that just outscores opponents? I don't think they're going to have to be. I think this defense is still going to be good enough to not be in shootouts like they were against the Lions. But yeah, it's I think the pieces are there to have a really good defense. The question is, does it come to fruition? And obviously we won't know until the season starts.
We will see. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We're out of here.
Later.